Hello and welcome to the Crux of Medtech. We go beyond the buzzwords, bringing you the insights from the innovators, investors, and leaders who are driving this life-saving space forward. Because I'm absolutely fascinated by the stories that people have to tell in Medtech. As someone who works in this sector on a daily basis, I come across so many interesting people and so many interesting stories that I think the world deserves to know about. Welcome to the Crux of Medtech.
Hello, David, and welcome to the Crux of Medtech.
Hi, Henry. Nice to speak with you today.
Awesome. So first of all, it would be great to give the audience a bit of an idea of who you are. So if you can take us through your career from the start and where you're at today.
So I've been in medtech for my entire life, 30 years now. Started at GE Healthcare as an intern in a small city called Waukesha, Wisconsin in 1994. Did most of my career over there. Spent some time in cardiology, oncology. And then the very last, I had the chance to lead the global mammography business, which was a small startup out of France, about, more than 70 years ago. But I did that for 5 years, and that was one of the most exciting roles I had. And then after GE, I joined a startup in France called RebrAIn, which is a robotic company, ultrasound-guided focused ultrasound device, meant to treat with no incision breast and thyroid tumors as well as varicose veins. And I did that as a CEO of a startup for a little bit more than 8 years, with many challenges, great lessons, and great discussions at the end of the day with breast oncologists and vascular surgeons. And after that, I did a bit of consulting, and the interim I worked with a Focus Ultrasound Foundation, to support the foundation partners to accelerate the use of focus ultrasound in any different indications as possible. And then during that time, I happened to meet RebrAIn's founders that actually did what I wanted to do in RebrAIn, which was, a smart AI tool to be able to guide a very complex focus ultrasound robotic device. And we had a great, mutual crush or mutual, finding great stuff together with the neurosurgeon founders and the PhD in mathematics founders, where basically RebrAIn has taken, two best pillars of AI technology to streamline one of the most complex surgical process in the world, which is deep brain stimulation for Parkinson and essential tremor. So since a bit more than a year, I've been chosen to be the CEO after a few months of consulting, cooperating with RebrAIn's founders. Came with Carista's blessing, the VC founder for RebrAIn, and we did, develop the company the best we can. So that company is just a stellar company. It uses supervised and explainable AI to streamline that very complex process and basically enable a surgical time with about a dozen of people in the room for 6 to 8 hours to implant a brain stimulator in the brain, which is right in the middle here, to less than 2 hours, doing the same thing with great clinical outcome. The clinical studies are stellar. They're under publication as we speak, but the result that we have communicated in different congress, raised the appetite and the interest of the largest neurosurgeons in the world. And we have duplicated our knowledge from DBS to lesioning. So we also qualify to treat patients with incision-less tool, such as MR-guided focused ultrasound, which is where it comes from somehow. And also the radiation oncology guys who are able to make a hole in the brain. So our vision is very simple. We take the best clinical data in the world. We train our algorithm on, controlled clinical data, and we're able with this algorithm to bring to the accuracy of what stereotactic gold standard is, which is less than 1 millimeter. And based on that, like the ways of neurosurgery, we help neurosurgeons throughout the world in their process of treating Parkinson and tremor patients.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much for diving into RebrAIn, and we're going to dive back into RebrAIn in a little bit. But first of all, I wanted to see, when you were at GE and climbing through the ranks, going to the mammography business and leading that globally, what was it that made you move outside of the world of big corporate and move towards a startup like TheraCleon?
GE was probably the best school for me to train from an intern, where I started in cardiology, working with my university studies and them. And it was a wonderful corporate DNA transmission global training. I worked and I lived in 3 continents with them. I worked and lead, global teams, and gave me an amazing capability to do the job I'm doing now and the one before, which would have been very complicated before that. I love the culture and I love, the simplicity of being first or second or exit your business. I love the ability to quickly reach out to a startup or to a global partner to make, customer better. And G culture was like that. And it's still very strong in my DNA. And when we reach out to former GE alumni, we always do things well together. Um, and then, the customer interaction with mostly radiologists in GE was outstanding. I have built relation in the oncology world and the mammography world, which still remain friendship from the US to Europe or to Asia. And that was wonderful. Then, after over 15 years, there was a time where, if you're given the possibility to go things more as an entrepreneur, so a little bit quicker than a big corporate guy, you just take your chance. And this is what I did.
Did it take any kind of transition period where you had to kind of unlearn big company when you moved to a startup, or was there any learnings that you had to take on very quickly that maybe you didn't think of before you joined?
It's great questions. I think when I was the global leader of mammography, I did 2 very strange things, which is very much towards what I do today as an entrepreneur. The first one I decided to build a startup in Munich to reinvent the mammography workflow, which was critical because you're basically doing screening of breast cancer detection, and it takes a huge amount of data to be able to do a good job. And a second reader mammography, if my recollection is correct, is like 30 seconds to understand whether the cancer or not. So bring the whole information at once in a uniform way is critical. And we didn't have that, so we built that Munich startup software, and it was a very agile discussion. I discussed with the BD team in GE. I met the founder in Munich. The BD team helped me to make a term sheet, and the term sheet was done. And in 3 months, we built the business, and it was a really great help. So I had that, entrepreneur agility. And then the second thing I did is at some point, it was 2008, and it was a subprime crisis. So a little bit more severe economic crisis than what we may be seeing in here, with the tariff stuff in the US. But it was really bad, and I had to literally fire a significant number of employees in one of my hubs. It was in Helsinki in Finland, and they were great guys. And had to go there and say, guys, I'm sorry, but I have to stop your job, and this is why, and it is my decision. So, and then at the same time, I was trying to catch up with my biggest competitor. At that time, a small company called Hologic. Now they're worth 20 billion, and I had no other choice, but I need to find money to invest for innovation, because otherwise I would not catch up with them. So I didn't have enough money, so I applied for like internal grant competition. I won second, and I was so upset that I said, no, I can't stop. So I went to see my actually future boss of Therakion, but he was, the global sales and marketing leader, Jean-Yves Burel, and he told me, I've met some guys in the Middle East, they have money. Why don't you try there? And I went to the Qatar Foundation and Mubadala. And Mubadala, I think, didn't really answer fast, but Qatar Foundation did. I went there, and in 3 calls, I had a term sheet for $10 million core development. So that was very much like fundraising experience. Incidentally, that stuff led to probably the biggest innovation I ever contributed for, which is the ability to screen women with dense breast or high risk with contrast enhanced mammography, which is as good as MR. And I happened to, it's a small story, is I happened to meet a year ago the US Akron leader for digital mammography, which did the first RCT for digital mammography trial. And she told me, David, you're right. Contrast mammo is better than tomo.
Wow.
But at that time, I think I did everything pretty well, except that instead of 10, I should have asked 20 million to do an RCT funded trial. But I was 35. I was not as experienced as where I'm at right now, and great clinical proof statements really changed medical practice and not only technology. And that was a big learning for me.
Wow, that's an awesome story. And so I know that we're here to talk about RebrAIn quite a bit, but thank you very much for diving into details of past experience, because that's a cool story. I think a lot of people will Will be quite inspired by. So with RebrAIn then, so what was it about the company or the technology that really, really got you interested when you were searching for that new position?
I go back to G a few seconds.
Okay.
One of the product I had was digital mammocat. That was a second help to help, mammographer to screen cancer. And to train a product was a PMA, or maybe still is a PMA. It needed like 20,000 cases, and it took huge effort to make. And it was deep learning. And it's really impossible in a normal healthcare life to access to so much good clinical control cases. Like you're sure the cancer is a cancer, it's not a cancer, and the non-cancer is not a cancer. And so your database quality takes a huge amount of effort to get. And RebrAIn's technology lies on two pillars, which makes a huge difference. It's supervised and explainable AI, which means that the biggest difference it makes, it only needs less than 100 cases to make a target. So you go down from 20,000 to 100, which is a total revolution in healthcare practice, and then makes this data-driven approach applicable to neuro, because neuro is more complex, but there are much less cases, right? The total number of DBS a year is 60,000. So it's like, very difficult to collect cases. And for RebrAIn, we collect cases of great quality control outcome. So they're all coming from, because they need supervised AI, so that we can explain the rationale why we say this is where you should treat the patient and this is how you should treat that patient. So we are looking for basically a under millimetric accuracy in a volume of something which is a little bit more than 1 cubic centimeter stuff, which is the subthalamic area. So it's controlled in some way. It's not as complex as finding the cancer in the whole breast. But then the label is critical, because if you don't have good label, means good quality data that you're sure that patient had that improvement or not, then you're not able to do the right learning of your data set. And the learning for us is not something I can do on your Mac or yours on yours or on both our Macs. It takes over 2 months of a super computer 24/24 time. So it is a very complex, equalization process, if you want. But the secret sauce of RebrAIn is really great data, few data. And therefore, it's immediately applicable for neuro, where we have not so much data and not so much great data, because we learn our algorithm on patients who often are up to 70-80% UPDRS or FTM scale improvement, and those cases are less than 20% of the total cases, statistically proven.
So for people who haven't heard about that scale, just talk through what that scale actually is in neurosurgery.
So one of the biggest findings working with neurosurgeons is that they're smarter than every other one combined. And they have invented for each of the disease a very complex scale, which is highly reproducible, meaningful, and worldwide adopted. So for tremor, it's a 25 scale data measurement called Fantôle-Zamarin scale. And for Parkinson, it's called UPDRS3, which is United Parkinson's Disease Scale Measurement. And those are 50 points. So these are very well known. One of the biggest difference for RebrAIn, unlike some of the publication, is we take the entire scale to measure a patient improvement status. We're not like taking a subscale, which would be somehow presenting what we believe we improve the best without looking at what we could degrade. Because Parkinson and tremor, when you treat the patients in the OR or in the HIFU, is a lot about the compromise between the efficacy and the complication. So looking at the total scale is an absolute critical stuff, which is what we do. Which only AI can do, because it's too complex. To do an AI equalization with 50 scale measurement, no brain can do that.
Okay. So when you talk about HIFU and the complications and the risk to it, talk to me about how surgeons make decisions on whether to go along with HIFU and try and treat these diseases. How do they make that decision, and how does RebrAIn help make that decision now?
So it's very much a patient-driven thing. In fact, coming from the Focus Ultrasound Foundation, this is really what patients want. Patients much rather have a small hole in the brain than to live hell of a week in hospital, full day in OR with awake asleep procedure and, basically a digital processor in the brain, right? With two leads in the brain, a digital processor in the clavicle. And they much rather go into ambulatory setting, into a MRG fuzz which is right now less than 2 hours. The challenge for MRG FOSS is it's not reversible. Once you've made the hole, you made the hole, and then you live with it. When you are doing in the OR, it's one of the most complex surgical process in the world. Requires, we can talk about it for many hours, but it's really cost, time, and experience demanding. When you go with HIFU, with OR, you can always shut the IPG generator off, and therefore you stop the modulation, and therefore you go back to a normal life, which is complicated from a tremor standpoint or from dyskinesia standpoint. But if you have created side effect, you can turn it off. When you make a hole in the brain, you've made a hole in the brain. So with HIFU, it's still easier because you can test, with lower temperature to do a transient effect before doing a permanent lesion. But still, sometimes, you make some side effect. And if you look at the literature, HIFU is probably also with some, decent number of side effect, which RebrAIn here can help. And this is something that I lived from my previous company in Terracklion, where we were treating thyroid, and thyroid is the vicinity with many nerve goes. And we know that there are danger zone and exclusion zone that you don't want your HIFU beam to go at, because nerve actually get very sensitive to heat increase. So, what we basically, I think, are going to be able to bring to neurosurgeons throughout the world is using great clinical cases and not so great clinical cases, to help on where the treatment should take place and how the lesion should look like. Because if we do both, then you can basically maximize the efficacy and minimize the side effect. And the side effect could be, some form of numbness or some form of imbalancedness. So they're, complicated cases for specifically elderly patients.
I'm interrupting this episode to bring you a word from our sponsors, TTP. TTP is a leader in complex medical technology development with deep scientific and engineering expertise. They support ambitious medtech companies in solving high-risk, high-complexity challenges where there's no margin for error. Whether you're tackling uncharted technical territory or racing to bring a product to market, TTP provide clarity and direction. By de-risking innovation and ensuring seamless alignment with regulatory and manufacturing demands, TTP help you move forward with speed and confidence. To find out more, check out the show notes.
Can we put this into real terms? Talk me through how you've helped a specific or a couple of specific surgeons to actually go and improve their procedures. You shared a couple of stories when we prepared for this that I think are quite compelling. So would you mind sharing a couple of those?
Sure. No, one of the best sites in the world is actually UVA. It's the first patient treated. Number one, there has, most number of cases. They're the principal author for the only RCT using HIFU. And we are on trial as we speak with them. Hopefully, the collaboration goes on and on with them because they're so experienced and, I have done many collaboration with UVA in my previous company as well, and I know what we can bring to each other. There was one case during the trial on which a patient that had gone through an initial treatment on her dominant side was treated very successfully, and then she came back because she broke her dominant arm, and she wanted the other side to be treated to not, suffer during her recovery cast and recovery time. So she was under the HIFU treatment. She knew what she had to do, but neurosurgeons don't really like to do bilateral tremor treatment because this is the case where they don't want to have permanent damage or permanent problem on both sides. So when they do the contralateral treatment, they do extra effort. And in the room, the neurosurgeon shared with me the story that he kind of struggled to find the optimal place without experiencing numbness. And he had the targeted done by RebrAIn, and after a couple of minutes he decided, well, let me try the RebrAIn case straight on, and the RebrAIn case just was perfect, tremor reduction, no numbness, and he was so happy with it. So even the best can be helped by RebrAIn. We don't pretend to be better than the best, but we can be of a constant performance because we collect the best cases. And I think, when having watched several HIFU treatments, several DBS procedures, a neurosurgeon is living a very difficult experience in terms of stress management because he's kind of alone making the decision on where to treat. And sometimes they have consensus discussion, but I think with RebrAIn, it brings another advice, a second neurosurgeon in the room. And that brings comfort, peace of mind, better patient safety. And that is worth a lot for all these guys, even the best.
Indeed. And what have you been doing in terms of gathering clinical evidence for the use of RebrAIn?
So we have, for the CE mark and FDA clearance, we've got several data. The first one is a phase 2 trial for essential tremor bilateral DBS implantation. This is what is under publication as we speak, under review, hopefully in the Impact A paper, where we've basically demonstrated that with a direct implantation of RebrAIn's target, we were getting gold standard performance in efficacy, quality of life, and patient safety. We've done similar trial, this time on Parkinson, multicentric, blinded evaluation, randomized, over 10 sites in France. And that trial has treated 128 patients. Last one, inclusion patient treated December 2024. So we're in the 12 months follow-up time. But we think that it went very well. It was faster in terms of acquisition speed of the trial, which is a good result. And we hear from one site to another that they have seen almost no difference between patient outcome between the innovation or the control arm. The major difference that in one hand they could finish the work at 11 a.m. and instead of the second one that lasted up to 4 or 5 p.m. So what we want to do through this trial, and we will see with the result, but it should demonstrate non-inferiority of RebrAIn direct implantation in a sleep mode versus gold standard cases of multi-sites. And if it does demonstrate that, then we're demonstrating a huge patient benefit in terms of guaranteed efficacy, better quality of life because shorter time of treatment, and therefore huge cost saving for the hospitals and the payers. So this trial is meant to land and be public in about a year from now, but that's probably one of the best trial design that we've seen in neurology, functional disorders studies. And we have 2 other trials which we plan to do, both phase 3 trial in first a gamma knife in Marseille, where we train our algorithm. We're about to start the trial. We've got most of the clearance with the French FDA under final discussion, but it should be imminent by June. And then we're going to treat about 50 patients with the same technique of single site, but still randomized with one arm control previous technique versus RebrAIn direct targeting. And we're collecting cases in HIFU in the US to do the same with HIFU systems multicentric in US. And we hope to start that trial within a year. We already got a significant part of the trial funded by the French BPI with the deep tech support. So we're confident that we're going to be able to start the trial, and that's why we collect the cases from UVA, UCLA, Duke, and the various different universities where we strike a data exchange agreement so that we can prepare ourselves the best for the trial.
Sure. And collecting all that data from around the world, do you see any differences between the data that comes out of, say, Europe or the US? And is there any comparisons between the data? Is it the same? How does it look in comparison?
It's relatively equivalent. The neurosurgeons, functional neurosurgeons, are a relatively small community, and they talk to each other, and they are very much similar culture, which is they're very focused, very detail driven, very clinical data driven, and they more or less do the same. Some prefer to do the way they want on a piece here or a piece there, but in terms of data measurement, they use common scale like FTM or UPDRS, and therefore we can compare really well who has the best clinical outcome. But it's mostly depending on the patient.
Okay. And when you're approaching neurosurgeons, have you ever met with skepticism over the fact that this is AI and how can it know better than me who's been training for years? Are there ever any surgeons who have that complacency?
we have that, let's say, objection, like,
Okay.
but you guys are going to try to teach me how to do better targeting and better treatment, like what I'm used to. I'm always better than you are. And for that, I just very simply said, maybe you're right. Why don't you give me your data? And, I either your data is same as us, and which is what we've proven to most of the universities so far, which is we comply to their targets 98% of the time. Or, if one day we find a different target with a great outcome, we would just label your data with our algorithm, and therefore your knowledge will be transmitted and shared throughout the world. So it's kind of easy to kind of neutralize that statement. And they're very interested because at the end of the day, they have all experienced difficult cases. And difficult cases in a DBS or HIFU world means a difficult patient outcome. And they, in fact, are very curious to learn from something which is never stressed, always fast, repeatable, and that has been trained over the great cases. And they understand basically how we make the system work. And in fact, we have defined a 18 reference axis system for each part of the brain. So the left hand side or the right hand side is, and that reference system is deformable because it's based on individual landmarks of each and every brain, each and every side of the brain, I should say. And sometimes you see a patient with a complete asymmetrical brain, which is round there, flat here, and the whole brain is disturbed, and you don't know where you should implant the patient. But RebrAIn has that deformable system, and therefore we've seen that some of the smartest neurosurgeons, when they have this dissymmetry and they're trying to identify where they should treat the other side based on the first site, they're making that same, let's say, gymnastic of where should I be, but they're never sure. And remember, the accuracy you need to put your leads or your center of the lesion is 1 millimeter. So 1 millimeter is just an MRI voxel. That's what it is. So it's very thin. So we guarantee 1 millimeter accuracy. We've got objective evidence that our, data, is within that control measurement. We've been audited by the MDR, DQS demonstrating that. So, it's really been seriously investigated. And I think neurosurgeons love that accuracy.
Sure. And what does that sub-millimeter accuracy actually mean for patient outcomes?
It's pretty simple. If you go too deep or too shallow, you will create gait issue, numbness issue, or you may even kill the patient if you really go. We're talking about the subthalamic network vicinity, which is really the central of where any signal goes to the cortex to decide what your brain should do. And when you look at the troctography, which is the diffusion MRI signal, it's very subtle. It goes 1 millimeter here and there, and if you're not at the right place, you can't make the right modulation. It's just like very simple. And as we train on a very good patient outcome, we're sure that the targeting that was picked for this patient outcome did work. So that's how we are pretty confident in the ability for us to predict something which is meaningful and robust.
Okay, excellent. You've got FDA and CE mark, so you're early on your commercialization journey. When did you get FDA clearance?
So we got FDA clearance on lesion last year in September. We applied in July and we got it in September through a special 510K. And the initial 510K was end of 23, was the first MDD certificate for DBS as well. We decided to go to lesioning because as we approach, when I arrived, we defined the US as the most strategic, biggest market to address in terms of early commercialization. But most of the sites we want to address were having more patients in lesion than DBS already. And, after 10 years, it's remarkable what Insight Tech has done with lesioning in HIFU, which is 50 sites in the US treat more than 800 sites in terms of tremor.
Absolutely.
In less than, first patient trial was 10 years, but the clearance is maybe like 8 years or 6 years only. So right now, patient demand MRG fast, first of all. And we couldn't really go into the US to these big sites with just the DBS offer because it made no sense. And because we had the chance to have that wonderful collaboration in Marseille with probably the first in the world that has made that process repeatable and stable 20 years ago, before Insightech, even started, Professor Regis had the data, and he shared the best of his data throughout his decades of work. And we train our algorithm on the best guy in the world, most respected guy. He's the president of the WSSFN. So it was easy for us to get that 510K clearance in the special 510K. And that opened the door for us to so many sites. And today we see that, in our scientific advisory board, over 2/3 of the physicians are from the US.
Absolutely. So it's interesting you mentioned Insightech. Someone from the company is going to come on the podcast pretty soon, so I'm excited to share that story, and hopefully these go hand in hand into the future. When you commercialize in the US, what's the biggest challenges you've experienced going to the US in the early stages of commercialization, or is there any challenges, or talk me through what's the hardest thing about going US?
So we thought the hardest would be the neurosurgeon, but in fact, US neurosurgeons are very curious. So after a couple of weeks, couple of months of trial, they kind of want to try and want to pursue. However, because those are the biggest university, their administration process is pretty heavy. And beyond the administration process, the cybersecurity process is just as complicated. And because we exchange clinical data, our physicians send us an MRI, and we return this MRI with a mark and a few other services. So basically, we exchange data, and based on that, we have to comply with all the rules of AI Act, such as SOC 2, ISO 27001, and so on and so forth. So we were not quite ready to do that last year, so we're catching up, and we have quickly defined, as an agile startup, on how to get as good as what our customer wanted. But at the same time, the admin process remained the admin process, and we're helped by all the neurosurgeons to help us out. But sometimes, even for them, it's hard to push the administration in these big centers. I think it's necessary for us to spend that time for the foundation of future growth, because once we have basically duplicated Bordeaux about a dozen times, we have great ambassadors throughout the world able to file an abstract to the next biggest congress, which is what we're going to do in Budapest for the SSFN, which is the European Congress of Neurosurgery Stereotactic. Is 3 US universities will speak for us there, hopefully, if they're accepted, but we have good hope they are. And therefore it takes time. But once we have convinced those 12 guys or 20 guys, then I presume it's going to be a little bit quicker, because the smaller sites are not as well equipped in terms of admin and cyber control. So,
sure. And how quickly does it take to roll out RebrAIn into a hospital or health system?
It's a SaaS model, so it's pretty quick. We send an email with a password. The guy set up his own password. It's personalized, and he can use RebrAIn. That's it. You can go live in a few seconds. Our algorithm, is pretty quick. We receive nearly 100 cases from the US universities as we speak, and we can process them in less than an hour. So our processing speed is really fast, and they can just use it. For the moment, where we slow us down is the credibility, the existence, and to be known. But this is necessary stuff. But given the little stories we find, just like the one I described was UVA here, and there are many others, which I cannot disclose because I didn't get the permission by the neurosurgeon to disclose. But every site, when we look at large clinical data and what we believe our system is good for, whether it's better efficacy, better safety, faster workflow, we have that stories, we have that evidence, and every neurosurgeon that we have spoken to is enthusiastic. And then it's only the beginning, right? When I show what we can do in the future, people think that, we are the neurosurgeon service insights company. We're not Abbott, we're not Medtronic, we're not Boston, we're not Insightech, we're not Electa. We work with everyone. We work for the neurosurgeons. We are a neurosurgeon spin-off company. And they love that.
Another quick interruption to tell you about our sponsors, KUKA. KUKA is a global leader in robotics with over 25 years of experience partnering with medtech companies on their journey to market. Their reputation is built on robust technology, reliability, and long-term collaboration. More than a supplier, KUKA provides trusted support throughout the product lifecycle, from development to integration and beyond. For companies exploring robotic solutions, the KUKA LBR Med offers a ready-to-integrate, state-of-the-art option that meets the highest medical standards, without the need to build from scratch. If you want to find out more, then head to the show notes and follow the link to KUKA's website.
So what's next for RebrAIn? What are the things that are coming up? What's the exciting things that you're most keen to do with the company?
Priority number one is, as I mentioned, to duplicate Bordeaux. So we have 2 great sites in Spain already, with Pamplona and Barcelona clinic. We want to expand to those, beyond Spain, which has the highest density of MRG FUS in the world, probably as good as the US or even better. They have over 10 systems for a small country like Spain, if you can imagine. And then going to the US, we're about to sign the first commercial contracts. I hope to have 6. So my real target is to get a dozen of those by the end of the year. And that's really my first focus. Customers always come first. The second one, what I think is critical, is for us to keep engaging with the same sites about the future, right? When we speak to these guys, we always ask at the end of the day, what kind of clinical evolution do you wish to process with RebrAIn? And here for us, we have some early conversation with some sites. For instance, I can share the indication like dystonia is, a kind of Parkinson for very young patients. They kind of freeze, and if you don't treat them, they die. So we want to partner with a site in the world that has the best knowledge to be able to replicate that ability in the world. And for us, it's kind of important to scout the horizon for that. And to do this, we need money. So I need to find, we're about to start for Series A funding. So we have great support from my board, our current investors. We're looking at 10 million right issue with probably about 3 million committed already. So we're looking for a lead investor or co-lead investor, or maybe a strategic partner, because, we're getting ourselves known by all the guy I mentioned about, because we can basically help them to sell more devices or sell more procedures. So partnering with something that makes sense for our customer and shareholders is something which, I do as well. Is, it's part of the job of a CEO to explain what you do to investors and to potential, I would say strategic partners, whether it's a co-development, co-distribution, or an exit, we never know. And it's really not the most important thing. What really makes sense is how can we accelerate to treat more patients? And this is my number one day-to-day focus.
Absolutely. And what's that 10 million euros going to enable you to do as a company? How's that capital getting deployed?
What we think we can do with this 10 million is to move from an early commercialization to an early adopter phase. So we aim at being able to capture around 300 sites in the US, a bit less than 20 million sales average recurrent, that we can get, which is, I believe, around 20,000 targeting. We're about less than 1,000 today. And number of targeting is important because really, this is really the market penetration. This is really how much market and value you create for not only yourself as a targeting company, but as a DBS or as a Insight Tech or Electa company. So those are really the most important thing. And we are thinking to be able to do that by the end of 2029. So it's, that 10 million brings us about 4 years, 3 years runway, depending on how much we spend, of course, and how much, if we can get the cash. But that's typically what we aim at doing.
Amazing. And beyond lesioning and DBS, are there any other applications for this technology that you aren't focusing on yet that come down the pipeline further into the journey?
Yeah, and I have this long-term vision that, DBS is great, HIFU is wonderful, but beyond HIFU, there's something which I believe can be even better, bringing the best of the reversibility of DBS and incisionless of HIFU is what we call LOFU. Low intensity focused ultrasound is today in the market in the research mode. In a very simplistic way, what LOFU is making is deep RTMS. It basically modulates a piece of volume in the brain without damaging any brain tissue. And if you repeat the treatment with enough dosage and enough timing, you create a protocol which reprocess the area of the brain that you want to reprocess. And this is under investigation today as we speak for matters like depression, like addiction, epilepsy, and those are probably within brain disorders, which is the biggest healthcare spend. It's about 20 or 10 times bigger than total cancer costs. These are the three biggest avenue that today neurosurgeons are spending a huge amount of time to crack the code on. And for the moment, they are phase 1 studies, 10 patients here, 20 patients there. And it's not only David Caumartin thinking that. I had the chance to be connected with Reese Cosgrove, which is probably the father of all neurosurgeons in the world in Brigham. And Reese has been kind enough to join our advisory board, second to spend some time with me and sharing to the world what he thought was for 2 hours. And I listened to his podcast just like you did, doing with me. And he was interviewed with one of the smartest, physicians in the US as well. And it was very interesting. And at the end of the day, the guys asked Reese what he thinks, and he answered the same thing as what I told you. So I didn't change my mind, but I was happy that we aligned together. For this, we're in discussion with potential OEM LoFu vendors who are investigating this epilepsy, this depression. We're trying to reach out to the sites and let ourselves known. What we can bring probably to these sites is we can repeat what they have invented with more accuracy and with a great reproducibility, which would be fantastic, because when you know how much damage makes depression, epilepsy, or addiction in the US and in the world, we don't have solution for these severe cases patients. And I think, it's very difficult for a device company to be a data company like RebrAIn. It's not the same culture. And I experienced that myself, and I discussed that again with a friend doing AI in security. And when you develop such a disruptive high-tech stuff, it's pure mathematics model. Playing with great clinical data, you have to have what RebrAIn has, which is outstanding data scientist, an extraordinary guy, followed by, very young, super talented people as well, which are mostly, engineer, PhD in mathematics and so on. And then you need a great clinical team, which understand, what scale to use, is this meaningful, how to dice and slice the data. And we have that. And not every site has that. Not every DM company has that DNA or even wants to go there. Because when you think through it today, we have a very light regulatory claim to go fast. It's a 510K, it's an MDR2A, but with more data we could probably get a stronger claim. And the stronger claim with a better data, you're not any longer a DM company. You're like a pharma company. You're basically telling the patients how you should be treated and how physician with that patient, this is what we suggest you to do. And therefore you're becoming not only a Waze, but like the autonomous car. If I can take that analogy of, what we know in the industry, we're not there yet. But I think it's a destination which would make tons of sense, because there are so many patients to treat. It costs a fortune to any healthcare systems. And we only, it takes more than 20 years to train a neurosurgeons to do a DBS surgery before he's autonomous. My biggest claim, in fact, to neurosurgeons is to say, well, in Bordeaux, it's not Emmanuel Cuny, 25 years experience, who's doing the job all the time. It can be his chef de clinique, which is like, I don't know if it's resident or, it's before being autonomous in most of the country. And the guy look at me and say, I can't believe that this is happening. Yes, it does. And she's great, but she's really well helped. And AI can accelerate the learning phase, can duplicate the knowledge, can streamline the processes just by focusing on great clinical data and use the technology of AI, which explains why you decide such a thing. So you can take your physician on board. It's not a black box that you don't explain why you do that.
So that's super interesting, and there is a bit of an argument to make that hardware is becoming more democratized, and that the real power of the future will be all to do with the software and the AI behind it, and the hardware would just be the delivery model, and it's who can build the best software which drives the hardware, which kind of puts the AI companies or RebrAIn into a category of future-proofing as much as possible, because you talked about that journey from DBS, HIFU, LOFU, and if you're the one who's doing the targeting and the brain behind it, then that's quite a defensible company. The only way that people could start to compete is if they're competing on price, or if they are building their own AI which can drive to the site. So it's quite an interesting concept.
I don't see the world of health tech like you described. I see
Okay.
the world of health tech. I've worked 8 years as a vice president of France Biotech, and I always share my knowledge with the pharma guy, learn from them, or the digital health guy. When I was a medtech guy, now I'm a digital guy, and I look at the medtech guys. We're all here to help patients and reduce cost. We are living difficult times with war spreading out, and the cost of serving the people is not going to get better. It's going to get less. So we have to do much better because we have large unmet medical needs, and we need to reshuffle the card from budgeting standpoint. We see this in every single countries. So AI is not taking the lead. AI is the enabler. We are nothing without the drug. We're nothing without the hardware guys, but we can make them smarter, a lot more efficient, a lot faster in the adoption, in the protocol definition, in the learning phase of our complex system. I mean, I just take back my HIFU system, which I know better than the others. They're wonderful, but they just kill physician after 2 or 3 treatments because they're so complex to use. I remember when I was in CT guy in Waukesha in the year 2000, my best guy who worked with was Stan Fox, and Stan was the lead of CT application guy. And he told me one thing, that David, when you develop something in the future, remember one thing, keep it simple, stupid. We don't have the time. Physician in this country, in the US, but it's true elsewhere, don't have the time for complex innovation. AI can streamline innovation, can make complex things uncomplex. And it's probably more being smarter than really being revolutionized. We see this as revolution, but it's like robotic surgery 20 years ago. We thought it never exists. Now we have robotic system everywhere in the world, even in the battlefield. AI is just making it faster, making it smarter. It's never going to replace human, right? I have a friend who is the CEO of American Hospital of Paris, and he said to me, I don't believe AI will replace us. He's a physician, he's a neuroradiologist. But I say tomorrow there will never be a physician without AI. And I think he's right.
I agree. I agree in some parts. I do know there's other people who disagree with that and believe that the surgeon will be replaced in the future. How far away that is, I don't know. But there are people building towards that future replacing. The one thing that I think the AI and the robotic systems or trying to fully automate procedures doesn't do is it doesn't have the human element. It doesn't have that patient care side, and that's, I think, what's got to be remembered is that care is human. If you're going in for a surgery, it's an incredibly scary time, and without a health practitioner who really knows what they're talking about and can give you the confidence, like that takes all of the personal human touch out of it. So there's people who would argue against that, but there's also people, I think, there's a lot of people who have the same point of view that, it's when the physician is not going to be replaced at the end of this. But that's
my personal thought is we should not be afraid. The only thing we have to be afraid is to be afraid, right? As I think Mandela said. The reality is we're going to be more people and less money to treat us. And there are still many people who don't have access to decent standard of care. And I think Parkinson and tremor are a very good example. You only treat 1% of the population you should be treating. And an untreated person costs $15,000 per year. And they die very quickly because you can't do anything for them, and it's really difficult. With simple mindset, you can do faster, do cheaper. And this is because you focus on great clinical data, so you are more scientifically driven, and you use the power of computing power system, right? Which is, I forgot that why it works today, not 20 years ago. We didn't have supercomputing power to be able to do what we're doing today in 2 months, right? 20 years ago. Now we can. So we can do this very complex algorithm, and find the right equation, the right mathematical model. But it really, making things faster and better. I don't believe we're going to replace any physician, specifically not the surgeons and the neurosurgeons. But with their knowledge, we're going to make sure that whenever they reach, their best expertise time, like Emmanuel Cuny today, Reese Cosgrove tomorrow, or whoever in their, near to retirement, their knowledge will be transmitted. And this is huge when you think about it, because it will be not only transmitted to their deputy, but it will be broadcast to the entire world.
Sure. Awesome. So to kind of round off this conversation, David, what would you like the audience to know about RebrAIn and any closing comments from yourself?
I think for me, as a 30 years medtech guy, I have a lot of fun in RebrAIn. It's challenging in terms of the complexity to address. It's a wonderful place to work, both with the team we have, which is expert, young guys, very customer focused, very agile. It's a blessing to work with neurosurgeons throughout the world, because we know how big the challenge is, and we only address 10% of that big mountains of brain disorders. I think AI is not I heard that once from one investor, is not like an artifact. It's a transformation. The question is not, we are an AI company. You say everybody will have to be an AI company. And that's a real transformation of how we are going to develop innovation in healthcare in the future.
Thank you so much for those closing comments, and thank you for joining me, David. It was an incredible conversation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Thank you, Henry, for giving me the chance. Lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much for joining me on the Crux of Medtech podcast. If you're not already doing so, please go ahead and subscribe on YouTube or follow the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Crux. Crux is a medtech search firm which places pioneers in transformative roles to help us live longer, healthier lives. We do 3 things for companies. We help hire world-class executive talent. We help companies raise investment from Series A to Series C and execute upon M&A. And we also are building a community of medtech leaders to facilitate peer-to-peer learning and accelerate the companies to help them go faster. If you're interested in any of those 3 things, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or follow the link in the show notes to find out more. Thank you.